Hey everybody, it's Peter again. This is the dusk patrol. I guess it's still pretty light out. We usually call it the we usually go by the dawn patrol, and that was coined by Larry Bond. At one point, I was talking to him. He called the show the Dawn Patrol, so I just went with it. Just because we always meet real early in the morning. So how are things going, John Gorkowski, the designer of both Breaking the Chains, War in the South China Sea, and of course South China Sea and IOR, or the India Ocean region, which were a follow-up series of its own. You would consider that a series, and Breaking the Chains was its own war game of a slightly higher scale. And maybe we'll kind of jump right into Breaking the Chains just a little bit. What you let's frame your game design history just a little bit here. What came before Breaking the Chains, and why the shift to it?
Okay. Well, first of all, Peter, thanks for hosting. I think these opportunities to meet and greet one another are fantastic. I've always enjoyed hearing from various designers, testers, and developers. So glad to be a part of this. Before Breaking the Chains, I was doing a lot of hobby work on the First World War. Made some games about the First World War, did a lot of research on the First World War. And that was an enduring interest of mine because it was not well covered by the gaming community at that time. There were some excellent titles in that genre, but it was pretty Spartan overall. And so while going through all that study of the First World War, I kept coming across parallels to the contemporary great power relationships. Before the First World War, Britain was the naval power, unquestioned, and Germany was a rising power, and it was a rising naval power, had been a land power. And there's a similar dynamic at play now, in Asia. At least certain parties in Asia perceive it that way. And there's also this idea that today we're so interconnected by trade that nothing could possibly trigger armed conflict. And that's how they thought at the outbreak of the First World War. It was assumed that there was too much connectivity. Open warfare was unthinkable. And the unthinkable happened in spite of the connectivity. And so those parallels sort of set me to work on applying all the sort of war game models and paradigms we're used to model history. And I applied those to model contemporary problems and challenges. Not the first one to do it, but that's when I got around to doing it. And so I started working on Breaking the Chains, which is really named after this idea of a first island chain. This from Japan down through Taiwan, the Philippines, this chain of islands that is a sort of imaginary boundary to Chinese movement eastward.
Becoming more and more imaginary.
Yeah, right. Correct, right. And so Breaking the Chains put a bunch of ideas on paper. I really appreciate, with all games, contributions of the developer. And in Breaking the Chains, it was Paul Glowatsky, really terrific guy who put a lot of energy into this. Because, we begin with a bunch of cardboard pieces and a rough map and a bunch of numbers that are best guesses for things like, ability to move, ability to fight, etc. And Paul put the game through its paces, worked with some people. I did as well. And, we came up with this map that included Taiwan and the South China Sea, Guam, and parts around them. Breaking the Chains is scaled at about 70 nautical miles per hex. And the units are, the ground units are regiments, and the naval units are pairs of ships or individual capital ships. And then the air units are, squadrons. So we're talking 20, 30 aircraft. And, just based on what we could find in open source, we guesstimated numbers for ability to defend oneself, numbers for ability to attack other pieces, etc. And that just requires a lot of research. Almost all of it can be done in Wikipedia. And then we ran it through Compass. Compass was gracious enough to produce it for us. And there it is. I understand Compass now wants to do a Breaking the Chains 2, which is worth exploring. I opted out of that project because I'm exhausted, and I've lately spent more time playing games than making games.
Very good. I just brought it up on the Ambassador just to kind of show the scale a little bit. I did want to kind of frame this not against, but alongside South China Sea, which we can get into lightly or however much you want to. I'm kind of focused. I focused rereading these rules, but I have played South China Sea a couple times.
Great.
It's been a while. It's been a while as well.
Okay.
And there are obvious parallels with some of the mechanisms, but really, there's a really different. I think anybody who plays one should absolutely take the time to play the other, just to understand the nuances of including Taiwan. Really, ultimately, right? And there's a little difference to it, and maybe we can kind of get into the subtleties of that here if you remember much of it.
Okay.
Let me stop sharing for a second. Get that number. So that's interesting. So what I mean that's interesting is that you actually went. I would not necessarily have guessed that you kind of you broached the topic or went over to the topic almost more from a geopolitical stance than hey. I almost got the impression that you might have been doing some defense industry professional gaming at the time. Have you been involved in any like professional level? Or
That's a great question. I got contacted by the Army War College a few years after Breaking the Chains came out, and their gaming unit likes to reach out to the hobby and bring us in from time to time. And I was one of several people who participated in Army War College curricula development.
Oh wow!
By through gaming, and that was this occurred when I was working on South China Sea, and they saw some of that game, and they saw Breaking the Chains. And the staff over there wanted a sort of custom version that they could play for courses. And so I, corresponded with them via the internet for about a year, exchanging ideas, talking about game development and design, and why we choose the statistics we choose, and so forth and so on. And then I went out there for a week or so. I guess it was July-ish, to participate in the course.
Was that even in 2020 or was that?
No, that was in 2020. That was, I think, in 2017-ish.
Okay.
Yeah, 2017-ish.
So to frame for the audience, you worked on Breaking the Chains in about what, 2012, 2013? How long did
Breaking the Chains was probably like 2011, 2012.
Okay.
I think it came out shortly thereafter, 2013-ish.
Yeah, they say 2014.
Okay. And it was out for a few years, and then after a few years of that, we were able to publish South China Sea.
The one thing I will, interestingly enough, I know that the individuals that worked on the operational warfare system for the U.S. Marine Corps also quote having played South China Sea as one of their influences, as well as, of course, like Victory Games Fleet Series. Yeah, I was wondering if you had any experience in any modern naval and air wargaming. Had you had any like harpoon experience as well?
Oh yeah. I was a naval officer
Oh,
I went to Naval ROTC. Was in Naval ROTC in college.
okay, that explains.
Navy paid for my degree, and so upon graduation, I served 4 years. And it's funny that you mentioned this because I remember my freshman year, I was in the ROTC building for some training exercise, and they were showing us a film about gaming, and they were describing that games can be valuable tools in developing your professional skill set. And on the film appeared the game Squad Leader. I'm a big fan of this game. And my mind was blown because I was 18 years old. I had been playing Squad Leader since I was like 13.
Right.
And here I am at college, at university. And, the Navy is showing me this video referencing that game and saying, the film said advances in hobby gaming have made great contributions to professional gaming. And so I experienced it for the first time then. And then, like we just discussed more recently, when I went and participated with the Army War College on their South China Sea game. So there's a lot of cross-pollination between the different communities. I've seen it many times. Another example, on one occasion, I visited the headquarters of an agency near Washington, and they have a little museum near the visitor's entrance. And in the museum, they show things that are emblematic of what that agency does. And one of the exhibits in the museum was a war game about Yom Kippur. And they were pointing out that these hobby games are, they have enough substance to be worthwhile academic exercises for professionals who are trying to develop skill sets that they'll apply in the real world.
Yeah, one I've been playing a lot of recently is Fitna by Nuts Publishing, and it's a good company. And I thought I knew a lot about, you always think you know enough or a lot about the Middle East and the politics, but that there are certain games that'll kind of really make you see the light a little bit about. Yeah,
and I think that's what gaming is about. It's about extracting the essence, of the dynamics in question, right? And then boiling them down to some rules that people can comprehend, remember, and apply.
There was one design note in particular I really liked in Breaking the Chains, and it was around the search and find model. I might even be able to show it here just real quick. Just like give it justice. Hopefully that's just. So it was originally designed with a search to find model, and players could not attack the enemy until they succeeded with the search dice. And this is a very intuitive design note here that, the shift in technology. I thought, especially even for a game at that time, yes, the sensors were getting good and some of the over the horizon radars and so forth, but it was a very timely design note. I thought that was quite unique. I don't think I've seen any other game do it like this too, where you yes, like Littoral Commander and some other newer ones, you kind of already know where they're at, kind of a little bit more implicitly. But I like the fact that you described why. I love design notes. I don't know as a designer whether you enjoy writing them either.
Oh yeah, that's the best part. The best part is explaining why you developed the rules you did, and that's a good example because that is an inversion of the usual paradigm.
Yeah. I mean, did you? It sounded like you didn't start with that, right?
Right. I started with the usual war at sea, search to find, which is, it assumes that there's a vast empty ocean and we have to find our target, right? And this goes back to World War I. That was the problem at sea in the First World War, was your ships had to scour this enormous ocean expanse to find the other's opponent. But now, as that design note demonstrated, we are, bathing the battle space in electromagnetic emissions all the time.
So you always know something's there.
You may not know something's there, but your detection capability is flooding the zone. And so if something is there, you're going to find it unless that something takes positive action to evade detection, right?
Or is and
Yeah. So
I like
the burden and then shifts on the target. The target now has to evade rather than the searcher finding. Finding has
I thought it
become
was just a
yeah.
it was a subtle touch, and correct me if I'm wrong if that does follow suit in South China Sea as
Yeah, it
directly.
does. It does.
Yeah,
And we increased the focus on that in South China Sea with more gradients in
there's a
terms of stealth.
focus. Yeah,
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 so you can have more differentiation between different units, and they
right,
can use that stealth variable in different ways, and it determines things like strike order.
right,
So,
right,
and
right.
this is all you know uh, what we observe, what I observe when I read about military operations in the open source press is that
Right, right, right.
things that are good at evading detection, um, they can stay hidden and they can strike first because you couldn't find them.
So just walk us back then. When was there a decision to make South China Sea, and what was the guiding light to that?
Well, one of the things that made me want to do that was, breaking the chains was a first effort, and you always learn from your first effort, right?
Okay.
And I like to actually listen to the feedback that people provide online about my games, and sometimes it's not very flattering, right? But I appreciate the constructive criticism, and so I took a lot of that feedback, and I did that to rework, my approach to that game, that space. And so a whole bunch of changes were folded in, and I transformed, the ideas of breaking the chains into the ideas of South China Sea, based in large part on feedback I got from the fan base. And I think
Hmm.
I worked quite a bit on it, in 2015, 2016, 2017. I don't remember exactly when it became published, but soon thereafter.
Yeah, it's listed as 2017.
There you go. It's 2017. It sounds like the end of the period when I was working on it. So there's 3 years prior to that, I was working on it intensively. And in that effort, um, again, great gratitude to Lionel Martinez, the developer. Again, the developer is always a key component here. You can't do this on your own. You need volunteers. And in the case of South China Sea, Lionel Martinez stepped forward and played the game, and ran it through its paces. Critical part of bringing this to publication.
If you don't mind me asking, what part of the naval service were you in?
I was in the supply corps in the surface fleet.
Okay. Interesting.
So
That's probably a great vantage point for a strategic game.
yeah, you learn a lot about
you see it coming from all the directions.
Yeah, keeping things moving. I don't know
Yeah.
if you ever seen or read the book The Caine Mutiny.
No.
Or saw the movie Mr. Roberts, but Mr. Roberts is this classic movie about it stars Henry Fonda,
Okay.
and he's this naval officer on a ship in a backwater somewhere in the back of the Pacific during the Second World War, and he really wants to get to the front.
Right.
Yeah, that wasn't me. I was the Jack Lemmon character. Jack Lemmon was the guy handling supply and getting yelled at all the time because things weren't working out. So
okay.
yeah, that's my role.
At least you weren't the crazy guy from In Harm's Way, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
I was
We
a
won't go into
workaday
that movie. That
pragmatic.
was a crazy movie. When
Yeah.
I just rewatched that.
Yeah.
You ever watch a movie and you're like, wow, this played out weird versus what I remember.
Yeah.
In Harm's Way. So the scale obviously changes. But what was interesting, I thought, was that you inversely added what I thought was a little more political pre-play.
Right? Yeah, correct.
And I thought it was pretty streamlined. I thought it was, and I remember I saw one review video about it, and they were like, I'm pretty much a Gronyard. I like kinetic fire.
Yeah, right.
But he was like, but I kind of enjoyed this because it generally, first of all, played quickly and efficiently, but it also had a relatively realistic effect without being too wonky, right?
Right. Well, yeah, I'm glad you bring that up. That was a direct consequence of working with the War College.
Okay.
Because their aim in doing this was teaching students about the sort of volatility of political military interaction in what we call the gray zone. This is all the sort of stuff that we're learning more and more about in the news every day, like some foreign power is hacking your computer. Some foreign power is blasting your ships with water cannon. Some foreign power is encircling a reef with its own coast guard, et cetera, et cetera. And these are all actions short of armed conflict, but they are assertive actions, and they create a whole range of difficult questions like, how do we respond to this? And the old answer of shoot your missiles doesn't make sense, because that would cause an escalation we're trying to avoid. And so, this is one thing that War College wanted to develop in their own game, was this ability to walk through escalatory steps and political actions, all the things that we represent in cards in South China Sea. So, that was added as a consequence of my interaction with them. And I wanted to make sure the commercial product had what grognards like. Grognards like to move their pieces and roll their dice and sink the other guy's ship. So that's definitely there, but you can see the influence of the more pragmatic professional gaming in those political pre-phases.
And you do see it kind of compressed into the card-related events, which I think were becoming slightly more popular by about 2017, 2018.
Correct.
I don't know if you had a chance to play Blue Water Navy or equivalent. Yeah. So
no, I haven't done that. I haven't played that one.
That's a good one.
Yeah. When it comes to past naval games, I really liked Pacific War. It's a victory game about the Second World War in the Pacific. Fantastic game. Maybe too detailed for a full strategic recreation, but quite good at simulating operations that span 2 or 3 weeks.
Right. Yeah, I'm very much. I think I'm the same. I'm a little bit more of a grand tactical or operational level player myself. Like the War at Sea by Grigsby. I don't know if you War in the Pacific. I'm sorry, by Gary Grigsby. I love it, but I can't get through it. It's just too much going on. It's too much detail.
Right.
But yeah, so I'm wondering, that wasn't the same folks that. Well, I mean, Victory Games, they did the Fleet series, of course, but
correct.
But I don't think they didn't share game mechanics by any chance. Did they?
No.
No. Have you had a chance to play the Fleet series ever?
No, I've never played the Fleet series. I've looked at it. I remember when I was in high school examining those boxes. I gave it a lot of thought, but limited amount of time, so I made other choices.
Let's see, that was probably about a Harpoon 2, Harpoon 3 GW.
Yeah, I did play Harpoon. I did play Harpoon, the computer game and the manual game.
Yeah.
So that was fantastic. That was a good experience.
Yeah. So what next for you? Where do you see yourself moving in the wargaming arena? I mean,
well, for right now, I'm spending all my time playing games.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Advanced Squad Leader.
Mm.
I hate the term advanced because it makes it sound a little pretentious. We're not really advanced.
There are so many nuances to the niche that is ASL. Don't worry. I've heard it all.
So yeah, that's this. It's a game I started when I was a teenager, and I had to put it on the shelf for literally for decades. Because real life was taking a lot of my time. And then I don't know, in the last 4 or 5 years, I have finally had time to get back to it. And so now I'm exploring all the material that was generated while I was away. It's a lot of fun.
Right. I would kind of classify it as the Harpoon of squad level.
Of land warfare. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, and just like Birds of Prey probably would be the air to air.
Yeah, very intricate. There's some very intricate games, and you have to really be into the subject matter.
You need to want to go slow.
Yeah, correct.
So here's an interesting analogy. I'm also into like command modern operations on the computer too. But what I'm finding, now that I've played Harpoon 5 mostly, the most recent one, I find that to be like the slow play, the description of how and why for these other games, right? So I appreciate that. I appreciate the slowdown and the mechanics. I don't think I can get away with it at a convention table, just because whatever. It's a little bit to juggle. But
yeah.
So that's one thing I like, in particular about Breaking the Chains. I think in particular handles the operational level at just the right about that sweet spot.
I really tried to achieve that because as a longtime player of Squad Leader, I fully understand what it's like to have too much detail.
Yeah.
And so when I was making games, I was really trying to manage the detail and restrain it so that the game could flow and so that people could focus on the decisions that were really critical to the subject matter without getting sidetracked.
Was that some of the constructive criticism of Breaking the Chains? And did that play at all into like the slightly more detailed tactical level? It's not like obscenely more detailed.
Right. But no, I didn't get any criticism on lack of detail or excessive detail. I think fortunately that's one thing I did right. It has broad appeal. It's enough detail to give people some appreciation for the subject matter, but it's not so much that it becomes boring, a slog, and so, for example, in South China Sea, I have the card here with me, the reference card. We have the units have statistics, as we always do, but the statistics are things like a movement factor, a stealth factor, and a missile defense factor, right? And so we boil a lot of complexity down to 3 numbers. And then, if you try to hit a target, you have to roll 2 dice, add your missile number, and try to exceed the target's missile defense number. Right. Very simple.
I like how your mechanics layer without too many layers.
Yeah, correct. We're trying to keep it very comprehensible, manageable, so that once you get it, you can apply it. Same system applies on the sea, land, and air. Same variables. So you don't have to, learn an encyclopedia and know a bunch of minutia.
One particularly nasty rule, in a good way, is the fact that, like, as your CVs, as your carriers get step damaged, you have to actually divert. I think it's one of the only games I've seen.
Yeah.
That forces the diversion.
Planes.
Yeah, that's like an evil GM rule.
Right. Well, that's one of those practical logistics rules.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So you can tell when a logistician.
Yeah.
Say that 10 times fast.
Yeah. You don't have space. You can't put the planes there.
Right.
Another thing I like, how we use the statistics is every piece in South China Sea, every piece is rated for stealth, and in those segments of combat that are really heavily stealth dependent, units strike in order of their stealth score. The more stealth you have, the faster you go. And then the whole sequence for any kind of military engagement follows a sort of logical flow, right? We start with air-to-air strikes, then we go to torpedoes by submarines, then anti-ship, then anti-sub, then gun strikes, torpedoes by surface ships, and then anti-ground, right? So
I liked, like in Breaking the Chains in particular, which which for some reason I feel I don't know why, but I personally find it more nuanced, I guess, in a good way. I look at I don't know what it is. I actually usually like the scale that South China Sea has, but there's just something about breaking the chains that just kind of pulls me back to it. And I don't know if it's potentially even the interplay of the additional operational area involved.
I think that's exactly what it is. I think the key difference there, big picture, is South China Sea is only that. It's only South China Sea.
Right.
Breaking the chains, you've got Japan and Taiwan. So you've definitely got more of a geostrategic picture there. So you get more, and you can see how the different areas play upon one another.
Yeah, and I liked the use of the special operations phase, right? Which was and how would you describe how that got morphed or changed or enveloped in South China Sea? Do you feel like that kind of moved more into the pregame?
No, it's not in the pregame. I think in South China Sea, it's more of the regular game.
Okay.
It's just like the special operations units, mechanically, they implement their capabilities in the same way that every other piece does, right? You compare these numbers and you roll those dice.
Right.
The difference is in South China Sea, you need some platform to deliver your special operators to the target.
Okay.
So it's less abstract.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And this gets people thinking about, okay, if we have these resources, how do we get them to where they need to be?
Okay.
And you can see what they can do, you know? So we try to bring out this, practical implications of what these things really can do. So, special operators are not going to go head to head with a enemy infantry battalion, not the best use of their resources.
Right.
But if you want to sink a ship in the harbor, and you can get your helo carrier close enough, these things can be worked out.
Yeah, I thought there were some interesting rules, and I thought that they were the nationality specificness of the especially the special operations forces was
that was a fun part of a consequence of the research.
Right.
I was unaware of that when I began, and then as I dug deeper into the source material, I saw all these nations have their own special operators.
Yeah, and they're very interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's an opportunity to add some color, maybe a little fiction to your game.
Sure.
But it's really
sure. But every special operations force has its own.
Yeah.
Right.
But when we get to special operators, another thing that I really wanted to show in these games was the importance of activity in the littorals, right? And so many naval games, you're basically land or sea. That's it. And we have brown water, littoral hexes. And in South China Sea, different kinds of ships excel in the littoral waters. And so, you want your deep holes further from land in the blue water where they excel. And then you want there's certain vessels like frigates, diesel submarines, and some others that do well close to land. And then there's the old amphibious ships with their flat bottoms that they're not good at sea because you get sick, and they're not good in the littorals because they just disgorge troops, and they're sitting ducks when they do so. So try to show the different capabilities of all these different vessels in this basically different water depth.
Right. I think was it in Breaking the Chains where you had the out of element markers?
Yes, correct.
Right?
Yep.
But that was I thought that was ingenious. I've never seen anybody do that. It's so simple an idea. Right. Did that get morphed just similar to some of the other rules? Did that just kind of morph into
it's in South China Sea. I don't know that we call it out of element. I can't recall how that particular circumstance was addressed, but mechanically. But the idea is there that a ship is not a ship. They're all different kinds of ships, and some ships perform better in deep water. Others perform better in shallow water. And then there's some like the amphibs they're kind of a compromise because of what they're designed to do, and so they're the middle of the road in this.
if I remember correctly, you might have transposed that to some of the movement rules.
Yeah, I think exactly. Different movement
Yeah.
charges.
Yeah, I think
Movement point charges. And that's something we were able to do because the scale in South China Sea is tighter, which means the numbers get bigger for things like movement score. So you can actually have a tally where you spend points as you go. And so if you're in a hull, like an aircraft carrier hull that's designed to sail in deep water, you're going to move slower in shallows because you don't want to, ram the shore or a rock or whatever.
And so IOR in the Indian Ocean region, was that, had you originally intended to include that, or was it more of a, hey, we want more?
Yeah, I think it was a, hey, we want more. I think there was a pull to develop something new along the lines of South China Sea. And in this, the artist was making really important contributions and looking for ways to link the two maps between Indian Ocean and South China Sea.
Right.
So that was another response to customer demand. People wanted this to expand, and so we developed, thanks to the artist, this map of the Indian Ocean region. And I did open source research on all the orders of battle for the various navies out there. And yeah, it's an interesting strategic and tactical problem set around the Indian subcontinent.
Yeah, absolutely. The Mayorkas Strait.
Yep.
So was there any ever thought for an East China Sea?
Well, yeah, there was.
Okay.
But then you start running into the exhaustion issue again. These, it takes a lot of energy to dig into all this stuff, and
because that would have been, they probably would have taken a lot. There probably would have been a little bit more unique mechanics necessary for some of that.
Yeah, and this is actually getting harder to do now because the real world developments are changing so rapidly. When we started working on all this stuff, it was very hypothetical.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Now stuff is actually happening, and so it's a little more challenging that way.
Yeah, I think you had a prediction. You had a prediction in the Breaking the Chains about the dominance of the F-35 or a Joint Strike Fighter being potentially the frontline fighter.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of fun speculation that we engaged in back in 2017.
So at that,
it's not been disproven yet.
Right.
So a lot of the things we suppose.
I hope we don't ever have to prove any of it.
Yeah.
But, and recently wargaming it myself. Yeah, you don't want to. Yeah, they might be able to make it off the beach, but not for long, right?
Right.
I don't know. So it's all speculation, and hope we force everybody. What we need to do is get everybody together and wargame it many times over together. I still want some world peace by wargaming by getting it.
Yeah.
It's like the old school duels,
Right. Work it out in a smaller group.
By figuring out that we probably shouldn't do this. Yeah. It's just agree not to do this. So do you feel like you? I do want to talk about Empire at Sunrise. By the way.
Okay, great.
That's a great topic. I literally had only just recently even known too much about what Japan was navally up to at that point. Of course, I know a lot about the Russo-Japanese War, but I didn't know necessarily too much about what they were doing early.
Empire at Sunrise was a ton of fun to work on. Hollandspiel's a great company. I really enjoyed working with them. And, their approach to this is do what's fun, do what you want to do. And they like unusual topics. And so little has been done on the Pacific theater during the First World War that it's a groundbreaking. Anything you do is groundbreaking, right? And so in making the game, and as the map demonstrates, it's a bit shocking to recall that Germany used to control an enormous amount of stuff in Asia, right? So what came to be called the Caroline Islands were once upon a time a German possession. Significant chunks of New Guinea, And then, of course, Qingdao in China was a German possession. And so they had a significant presence there. They fought a significant land action in December 1914 when the British combined with Japanese infantry to attack Qingdao. And that went on for a couple of months, culminated in December with the German surrender of the colony. And that's why the German naval units scattered through the Pacific to do as much damage as they could, trying to flee back to Germany. And they knew it was unlikely they were going to get there. But they figured while we sprint for Germany, let's wreak as much havoc as we can on the Allied resources. And so there was a real open water, traditional surface naval struggle in Asia for, I don't know, 4 or 5 months, and ultimately ended at the Battle of the Falklands, where the British finished off the last of the German fleet. But before that closing act, the German naval units did a lot of damage, and the practical consequence, strategically, the consequence of that was, they probably delayed the arrival of the Australians to the Middle East by several months, something like that. Nothing too grand, but when you zoom in, it's really a fascinating piece of history.
So just speaking of corners of history, I mean, are there any other corners of history and little nuggets of war gamery that you have in your head? Is there anything you even off the wall, just where you just like to try some new mechanics or anything like that?
Yeah, I've made several games that I never pushed to publication because I didn't think they were good enough. Okay. And so one of the topics that's always intrigued me is the Second World War in the Pacific, right? This Pacific War. And it's a vexing problem because the scales are so vast. And so you have to account for the movement of these military units thousands of miles, sometimes in very short periods of time. And, in wargaming, we're used to Western Europe, where you have armies occupying spaces, and they're all congested, abutted to one another. So I can't possibly move across Europe because I'll bump into somebody else's army. But in Asia, in World War II, it's very different. There's vast open spaces, and relatively small numbers of troops were able to assert control. And a classic example is the early stages of the Battle of Guadalcanal, right, where the Japanese landed elements of a construction battalion. They had, and thereby had dominance over the Solomon Island chain, right? It's incredible. Just 300, 400, 500 men, and this 1,000-mile long archipelago is under your control, right? Until the Americans intervene with a Marine infantry division, right? Which again, on the European scale, is small. Like, people forget, the U.S. Marine Corps during the Second World War, the U.S. Marines were at their height. They had 6 divisions, right? And the Allied forces landed 6 divisions at Normandy alone, while they were also fighting in Italy on the Russian front. So the scale in the Pacific War was just real contrast. And so it's fun to model, and it's very challenging. So that's something I've always kicked around. Another thing I've thought about is, the scramble for Africa. Mm-hmm. This when the Europeans imposed their yoke on the African continent. Mm-hmm. That's something worth looking at, but very, very difficult to handle because, there was the Europeans had so much more military might. Only a few African powers were able to, resist, notably Ethiopia, right? And so there were some real interesting history there as well. So
back to just game design in general. do you tend to just start with some tried and true mechanisms and then drag and drop other mechanisms until they
No,
Yeah.
I try to start with a totally new mechanism. I try to start with something that I haven't seen before. I look for the sort of unifying principle, the central theme that is making the game work. So my favorite example of this is what we did for red poppies, and every ground unit in red poppies has a formed side and a dispersed side. And at the core of that game is this fundamental problem of the First World War is in order to control my troops, I need to bring them together. But in doing that, I make them vulnerable to enemy fire. So the act of asserting control is destructive, right? And that problem was solved by the time of the Second World War when, the world's armies were using dispersion to avoid these massive casualties. But that problem was only just being recognized in 1914.
Okay. The interesting parallel to that is DMO, right? Distributed Maritime Operations and Modern Naval Operations.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yep. And that's a great point. Think about it. We have for decades, we have said, okay, let's make a carrier battle group. Let's bring everything together. We got fleet oilers, we got carriers, we got cruisers. Let's put them all in a big, tight bunch and sail across the ocean, right? Guaranteed suicide mission nowadays.
Right.
You have to be able to disperse. And so getting a handle on how to articulate those fundamentals is where I like to begin with game design.
Very good. Very good. Have you written any books by any chance? I tried to look that up before we met here, but have you had any?
No, I haven't written any books. I haven't written any books. Maybe that's in my future.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I think you got a book in you, John. So,
yeah, maybe, or at least some daydreams.
Right. But see, I want you to do that, so then it sparks your interest to make another war game, of course, right?
That'll happen. I just need to recharge my batteries, and I'll get back to it.
Yeah. Okay. Have you been without? You don't have to get into particulars if you can't, but do you have anything lined up specific or?
No, I don't. I don't have anything specific lined up. A number of companies have asked me to work on stuff.
Okay.
And I've just explained to them, I'm just in need of recreation for a while.
Right. That's a good thing anyway.
That's why I'm glad this is a hobby, right? We get to, it's all voluntary. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think we'll wrap up there, John. And
okay, very good.
I very much enjoyed it. I did want to ask you, I don't know why, this is a very specific question, but when you were working on Breaking the Chains, I think you even quoted Red Star Over the Pacific. Was that?
Yes.
Is that like that was the main research of that time, right? Was there any other research in particular that you remember helping?
I remember Red Star Over the Pacific. I think there was a book, Red Dragon Rising.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe I'm getting the title scrambled. And then there was a lot of Wikipedia. Wikipedia is loaded with incredibly important and valuable information. And one of the things I always did in my research is you can sort of test the trajectory of statistics and information they give you by going all the way back to the Vietnam War. And you can, dig into performance characteristics for the F4 Phantom, right? Mm-hmm. Which, by now are declassified and easy to verify because we're no longer using that. It's from long, long ago. And so you can begin with what is truth, right? And then as you continue your research with open source material, information about more modern weapons is not nearly as precise or abundant.
Right.
But because you can ground yourself in the outdated stuff that's been declassified, you can get a good handle on trajectory, and this is helpful to understanding what's going on today.
Is there anything that's happening today that you would not have predicted when you first worked on Breaking the Chains?
I would not have predicted the invasion of Ukraine.
Okay, I was about to say,
yeah, I was surprised.
other than the obvious.
Yeah, that was a surprise.
Okay.
I did not. Wow, surprised the world, right? They really pushed it. So there you go.
How about, well, without getting too deep into it, but how about what would you have predicted the 1 year outcome to be in such a conflict? I mean, would you even have predicted where they're at now?
That's a good question. I don't know enough about the Ukrainian military
Sure.
to really do anything other than say what most other people say. And I think that's why we get this groupthink that is so prevalent. You know, remember at the outbreak of hostilities, after the Russians invaded Ukraine, people expected Ukraine to collapse in a matter of days. And I think that groupthink evolves because most people don't know enough about what's going on in the Ukrainian army to have an informed opinion. I certainly don't.
Mm-hmm.
And so they just latch on to the bandwagon. Oh, they're going to collapse in a few days, right? But in hindsight, if you were aware of the Ukrainian will to fight, you could have made a reasonable guess that, yeah, they're going to hang on. They're going to do this. They're not going to fold. And that's where you really have to know your stuff on a case by case basis. They really showed some backbone, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Surprised everybody.
Speaking of surprising or not, would you have predicted the proliferation of the planned Navy as far as how much?
Yeah. That's an easy statistics exercise.
Okay.
The PRC has been building out its Navy since about the year 2000. And every year it gets bigger. And every year what they do, what they do less of every year is prototyping. And what they do more of every year is production.
Producing. Yeah.
Yeah. And in the early days, circa 2000, they would make a frigate, produce 3 or 4 versions of it, and then make a new frigate, and then make 3 or 4 of that, and then make a new frigate, and then make 3 or 4 of that. And they went through rapid prototyping. And they ended up with this hodgepodge of naval units. And somewhere around 2010-ish, the PRC started selecting its best models and making those in greater numbers.
The Type 55 in particular.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so now they're transitioning to mass production in that sense. And so it's easy it's not hard to anticipate that they're going to do that. And it's been clear for at least a decade.
It's basically Arleigh Burke syndrome, right? Like where
exactly.
You find a good
one that works.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, please, U.S. Navy.
Yep. And they had to go through their prototyping phase, and they did that.
Right. Bring back the Tycho as well.
Yeah.
I don't know about that one, but great talking to you, John. And,
likewise. Thanks, Peter.
After I get some play of Empire at Sunrise, I might have to talk with you again about that, either privately or openly, whatever. But
sure,
I'm picking that up.
I'll look forward to that. No problem. Anytime.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for talking.
Okay.
And everybody that has watched, we have had a couple people watch, and they said thank you. This is one here. I'll show you this one comment. It's nice. I second that. Sorry. It's a great word to describe it. It's very elegant. Yeah. It's detailed but approachable, and that's exactly the type of game I like, and I think a lot of people do too. So go buy.
Great. Appreciate that. Thanks.
All right.
Bye-bye.